tuning in to AWANI Tonight with me, Cynthia Ng. Concerns about COVID-19 still high but declining. And Malaysia moots mutual recognition of vaccine certificate. How to get it started? That's coming up. Science, Technology and Innovation Minister Khairy Jamaluddin denied claims that the Selangor state government waited for months to get the necessary approval to procure 2 million vaccine doses for its people. In a statement today, Khairy said Putrajaya has yet to receive formal requests from state governments on the procurement of COVID-19 vaccines, despite Selangor and Sarawak having made known their intentions. Khairy was responding to opposition leader Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim's accusation that Selangor and Sarawak were facing delays in obtaining approvals for procuring their own supply of vaccines. Khairy clarified that they are free to secure their own supply provided the vaccines were approved for use in Malaysia. Malaysia recently proposed a mutual recognition on COVID-19 vaccine certificate with Australia. A similar arrangement with Singapore was mooted last month. How would this vaccine certificate look like and what criteria or guiding principles it should have? We talked to health policy specialist Dr. Koh Swee Keng.
The first guiding principle is to have an underlying technology that recognizes the vaccination status of the people in Malaysia or Australia who have actually received the vaccine. And it may sound very simple to have an electronic system, but it needs to be an electronic system that is reliable, tamper-proof, fraud-proof, crime-proof, and reproducible, because at some point a Malaysian traveling to Australia or an Australian traveling to Malaysia will need to have a way for us to verify that this is indeed a vaccination certificate that was issued by a competent authority in these countries. The second guiding principle is to consider a solution that is firstly bilateral and then scaling up to something that's multilateral. So a bilateral solution is easy to start with, but you must build in scalability, and that's an important guiding principle. Scalability in the sense that we don't want to have Malaysia and Australia having one channel, Malaysia and Singapore having another channel, Malaysia and Hong Kong having a third channel, and the European Union, for example, and then China and then the US imposing their respective channels on Malaysia. Thirdly and finally, a guiding principle will be, as far as possible, to use international organizations as an anchor for the regulatory standards that are needed for vaccination certificates, that we shouldn't really be doing our own thing in a corner of Southeast Asia, but we should really be mindful of the global and international trends.
Besides being vaccinated, Dr. Kaur said there is also a need to prove the presence of antibody in an individual to allow for cross-border travel.
A vaccination passport only proves that you received the vaccine. And that is important, but not as important as an antibody passport to prove that you are indeed immune from COVID. What I mean to say is, even if you have been vaccinated, your immunity status may wane or rather drop over time. And therefore, it's important to prove that you have antibodies against COVID, which is, I think, a higher standard than just merely the fact that you've been vaccinated.
And what needs to be done to establish a mutual recognition vaccine certificate with other countries? According to Dr. Kaur, appointing a designated ministry would be the first step.
The first thing and the best thing that the Malaysian government can do is to appoint one ministry to lead these efforts. We can imagine a Ministry of Health wants to get involved, Ministry of Tourism wants to get involved, Ministry of Foreign Affairs wants to get involved, Ministry of International Trade and Industry, and finally Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. Each of these 5 ministries have got a reasonable claim to be the lead agency in creating a vaccination infrastructure to document or prove that you've indeed received the vaccinations. But when you see that each of these 5 ministries will have, say, competing priorities, competing interests, or perhaps their own political agendas, there will be massive confusion if we were to have 5 different ways just in Malaysia to have a vaccination passport.
The COVID-19 pandemic is still a pressing concern for Malaysians, but fewer are now as worried as they were in the second half of last year. In a recent report by Ipsos, concerns over the pandemic have dropped to a level not seen since July to September. According to the report conducted on 500 Malaysians between April 2020 to March 2021, concern towards COVID-19 peaked at 85% in April 2020. The percentage then saw a decline throughout April to July 2020 and increased and maintained at 74% in October 2020 to March 2021. Meanwhile, the report showed a 12% improvement in emotional and mental health for Malaysians in March this year compared to the beginning of 2021. To add to that, 2 out of 3 Malaysians say they think life will start to resemble normal within the next year. In the second part of our coverage on urban poor in Malaysia, we asked Wan Yashin from Ideas on measures to help mitigate economic hardships faced by the urban poor. Just how effective are policy responses like cash injection in reaching the low-income households in urban clusters? And what more needs to be done to break the poverty trap?
So we've seen that the social protection scheme actually caters a big portion of the social protection that has been extended goes to wage subsidies and also the cash transfer. So these are very good measures, especially during a crisis. Cash transfer is a very fast and efficient method to approach and also to reach to the people. But after the crisis, now is a time that we think about how do we move forward from this. Should we have a more targeted approach instead of a broad-based where most people can access some forms of support during the pandemic?
Yashin outlines some of the policy recommendations that the government could explore to better assist the urban poor in Malaysia.
One of the things is to integrate and coordinate all the different social protection programs, social welfare, social insurance, and so on, and to find out where are the gaps in the system. Besides that, also to integrate social protection database for efficiency, effectiveness, and coordination. So we see that countries that are able to reach the people fast and efficient are the ones that have a good database because they know who are the poor and who needs help and what extent of help do they need. In the medium and long term, I think one of the most important things is ensuring jobs are secured as well as creating jobs and help the unemployed to reskill and upskill to adapt to the changes. Upskilling and reskilling is very important to ensure that those who lost their jobs during this time could adapt to the new normal and they could move on to other positions in maybe other sectors or industry. So digital skills, soft skills such as critical thinking, creativity, entrepreneurship, these are all the trainings that is needed by them. So in the long term, of course, we've seen like in terms of education, we know that that's the loss of education during this time. How do we ensure that we don't lose this year? And how do we help our children to catch back this loss of education during this year? So we need good quality online learning because we do not know until when this pandemic will finish, right? And there's also the idea of setting up community learning centers at the lower income areas where children from urban poor can actually access these centers to access online learning and also do some other activities, educational activities.
We'll take a short break. Stay with us.
Dan baju. Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada support system. This is orang yang membuat polisi.
Kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak.
Welcome back. India reported more than 2,000 COVID-19 fatalities today, the highest single-day death toll for the country so far. Experts have warned that the official death toll does not reflect ground reality and that it could rise sharply as hospitals struggle to cope with a surge in cases.
Several major cities are already reporting far larger numbers of cremations and burials under coronavirus protocols than official COVID-19 death tolls. India also continues to have the world's highest daily infection rate, with 295,000 new cases recorded in 24 hours, on par with numbers seen in the United States in January. Meanwhile, New Delhi, the capital city, began a 6-day lockdown late on Monday that officials hope will slow the virus transmission and relieve the pressure on the healthcare infrastructure.
Japan's government is considering a state of emergency for Tokyo and Osaka following a surge in new COVID-19 cases. This move would enable local authorities to impose curbs to stop infections from spreading. Japan has so far avoided the kind of explosive spread of the pandemic that has plagued many Western countries. The country reported total cases of about 540,000 so far. But the latest rise in infections has raised alarm, coming just 3 months before the start of the Tokyo Olympics. Four crew members were found dead after a ship ran aground in the southern Philippines today. 7 have been rescued while search is continuing for 9 others. The bodies of the 4 crew members were found after being washed onto the shore of Surigao del Norte province. The crew of LCT Cebu Great Ocean abandoned the vessel, which was carrying nickel ore and diesel, before it ran aground. The vessel was taking shelter from rough seas off another province when its anchor broke, causing it to drift. China President Xi Jinping will attend the United States-led climate summit this Thursday. Held virtually, this will be the first meeting between the two leaders since Joe Biden became the president of the United States.
According to Chinese Foreign Ministry, Xi will attend the summit via video to deliver a speech. US and China are the world's largest contributors to global carbon emissions. Biden invited some 17 world leaders to join the 2-day summit to discuss ways to cut carbon emissions and reduce global warming. This is after Biden rejoined the 2015 Paris Agreement. US withdrew from the agreement under the previous Donald Trump administration.
Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted of murdering George Floyd. President Joe Biden said the jury decision was a giant step toward justice in the United States. Floyd's death last year set off worldwide protests against racial injustice. Chauvin's trial became one of the most closely watched court cases in years. Derek Chauvin, a white officer, was convicted after kneeling for more than 9 minutes on the neck of Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, during an arrest last May. Video of the incident set off worldwide protests against police brutality and racial injustice. The 12-member jury found Chauvin, 45, guilty of all 3 charges: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter. Cheering and an air of celebration filled George Floyd Square in Minneapolis following the verdict, almost a year after Floyd was pinned to death there. After almost a year-long wait, Apple returned with fresh announcements and products. In a virtual event, Apple launched a range of new computers, a paid podcasting service, and devices for locating and finding lost items.
The new AirTags are tiny devices that can be attached to items such as keys and wallets to help locate them when they are lost. While the new iPad Pro tablet features same Apple design processor that powers the recent Mac computers and also comes with keyboard and trackpad options. And finally, a refresh of the Mac desktop line boasts 7 color options.
Despite assurance by the government that the 120-year-old girls' school will not be demolished once its lease expires, will Convent Bukit Nanas be preserved for posterity? Catch conversations with the school's alumni tonight on Consider This. That is all we have for you on AWANI tonight. Get the latest news updates on COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines from astroawani.com and Astro AWANI app. I'm Cynthia Ng. We'll see you tomorrow.